Welcome, everybody. We're really happy to have you here. My name is Vivian Bruce Conger. I'm a member of the Humanities Curriculum Committee, and our team who is bringing you this course is really happy you're here for today's session, the fourth of four. So this will do it, I guess. And maybe we'll get a chance to ask, is de Tocqueville's America ours? I want to say, God, I hope not, but that's all right. So take out your cell phones, ensure they're silent so we don't disturb anybody, distract from a conversation or Jim's presentation. Silence it, turn it off. I think I've got mine silent 7 ways from Sunday, so we'll see. Welcome to the crowd joining us via Zoom in the Haas virtual classroom. Special thanks to our special course technician, Amy Weber, for supporting for the fourth and last time our hybrid modality. Now I'll just think of that in my sleep and say it every day. So if you have questions or comments to pose at the appropriate times, and Jim's pretty good about letting you know when the appropriate time is. Please wait till I can bring the microphone around to you so everybody can hear. Please note that our February monthly meeting will be hosted tomorrow, Tuesday, February 13th at 9:30 a.m. at the Jack H. Miller Center for Musical Arts. You may also join from home via the live stream, so stay tuned to HASP Happenings for the link to join. The program is titled Holland BPW, Clean Energy, Cleaner Community, and it is presented by Dave Koster, the General Manager of the Holland Board of Public Works. And tomorrow's also Fat Tuesday. And so I have to get my fasting blood work at 7. I'll be right at DeBur's as soon as I can to get my pooch key. That's something I learned 2 years ago when we moved to Holland. Never heard of it. So as always, after the meeting, you're invited to join us in the lobby of the Jack Miller at 9 a.m. For coffee, cookies, and conversation. Cookies are delicious. I don't usually have coffee, but I try and sneak a couple of the cookies, so I get there early. I learned. So Jim Bratt, his publishing interests have grown from his Dutch Reformed background, and his principal teaching interests have been early America and American religious and intellectual history. So he and I cross in the sense that we're both early Americanists. I'm more of a social historian than an intellectual historian. And he's writing a book now called 1843, American Religion in the Year That Christ Did Not Return. So I think that's it for my introductions.
Okay.
Jim?
Yeah, thank you again. Well, this has gone fast. It's the fourth session. I really enjoyed it, and I think a lot of you have as well. What I'd like to do today, sort of the background theme, is to have us consider how good or accurate a prophet Tocqueville was, because we're focusing on his fears, his worries for democracy, his apprehensions about the future of America from the point of view, his point of view, 1835, 1840. In accordance with the wishes of my dear wife, Tina, I'm going to try to close on a positive note. Why do you always have to be such a pessimist? Well, I think, and Tocqueville has a lot of positive things to say about the United States as well, and about democracy. So I'll try to close on the close of his book, the last pages of his book, where he sums it all up. And he has this very guarded, very moderate outlook. At the end of this project, he says that 10 years after taking it up, I'm full of fears and hopes. I'm full of fears and hopes. And I don't know, when he talks about them, it's kind of where I am about the future of the United States right now. There's reason to hope, there's reason to fear, and so forth. So let's see how much Tocqueville's set of fears and hopes and apprehensions may line up with ours. So he saw three threats to democracy, or three threats arising out of democracy. The first is the tyranny of the majority. The second is the prospect of the rise of an industrial aristocracy. And the third he calls the despotism characteristic of democratic countries, or democratic despotism, by which he means the threat of centralization. So we'll be taking these up in turn. And yeah, I'll try to take some questions and so forth at the end of each section. So first of all, hello. We seem to advance them. There we go. What does he mean by the tyranny of the majority? At least what did it look like to him from the time of his visit to the time of publication of volume 1? And the tyranny of the majority, I did not assign reading on that because you'd enough, and he really gets into the weeds and goes on and on about this. But it's in book 1, volume 1, where he's, again, remember, talking more about the political system and political operations. If you go and read those pages, you'll find him really hammering at this. This is a real threat to him, that the majority can sweep everything and everybody away without compunction and without being held accountable. But it's interesting where he locates the grounds of this fear. In these pages in volume 1, he says, look, in the United States, all power's in the states. The federal government just isn't much. And what the federal government was at that time was a post office. I mean, right now, supposedly, the federal government is an insurance company with a big army, right? Social Security and Pentagon, that's most of the spending. Well, then it was a post office, land agencies, very important for the settlement of the West, and a very small army. Remember when Jefferson, as president, 1801, took office, the State Department had 15 employees. So it was the states where he saw the power. It was the states where he saw the activity, the initiative, and in many ways he was right. What's more worrisome to him that in the state level, all the power was in the legislature. He doesn't talk about governors at all. The court system is in its infancy. It's the lower house of the state legislatures that in the 1820s and 1830s were just running wild. The picture here is a cartoon etched in the middle of the Panic of 1837, right? Because there was no Fed. Andrew Jackson had refused to sign the rechartering of the Bank of the United States. So every state had its own bank system, and there are banks all over the place. And they were not tethered to gold. They were supposedly tethered to gold, but and the states were running big deficits for internal improvements to build canals and railroads. This is a race among the states. The Erie Canal succeeded so well that everybody wanted to copy that. So the states were playing really fast and loose with financial responsibility. Plus, there were frequent, sometimes annual elections. If you think that we're perpetually in election season in the United States, you were back then. The legislature, the House of Representatives and the Senate in some states would turn over at least every 2 years, sometimes every year. And there was much higher turnout for state elections back then than for federal elections. This changed in 1840 when over 88% of the eligible electorate turned out for the presidential election. Remember, Tippecanoe and Tyler too, who could resist? But that was unheard of and unprecedented. But you had high election turnouts, electorate turnouts at the state level. And he said that there's no end of new legislation that gets churned out by these state legislatures every year. I call them not pill mills, but bill mills. They just, and then you get a whole new bunch of legislators the next year. They would undo these, try to reverse these, put in their own. It was kind of chaotic. It was highly volatile, and it was unchecked. So the unchecked, the unmitigated sovereignty of state legislatures really worried him. Because what happens at the end of this process in the 1830s is the worst depression the United States had experienced to date. The panic of 1837, a run on the banks and so forth. They kind of cured it for a while, but then it came back in 1839. It had to do with cotton prices on the London Exchange and so forth. We won't get into the details. But the United States did not really pull out of this depression until 1843, which is one reason that a lot of people were hoping that Jesus would return by then, because they had lost everything, right? Okay. Tocqueville goes on, though, to say that this is a cultural as well as a political problem. In the middle of this discussion about the politics on the state level, he says there's tyranny in democratic republics ignores the body and goes straight for the soul. So he's comparing tyranny under republics to tyranny under monarchs, where they go right for the body. They imprison you, they torture you, they draft you into the army, they do all nasty things to your body. They don't do that in the United States. They simply limit, they put your mind in a straitjacket, he says. The parameters of public opinion are very narrow. There is a forced conformity of mass opinion. He said, yeah, there's freedom of speech, freedom of the press, but if you exercise it, he finds, you will be ostracized. You will be of no account. So you can say what you want, nobody will heed it, and nobody will be your friend afterward. This is a theme that was big in Tocqueville's scholarship and commentary in the 1950s. Social cultural commentators in the United States in the 1950s picked up on this, because the 1950s, of course, were the fabulous age, the famous age, the infamous age of conformed opinion, right? Ozzie and Harriet with their 2.5 kids, a white picket fence around a nice suburban house, and Joseph McCarthy making everybody scared to speak their mind. You have books like the Organization Man, The Birth of a Mass Society, Whatever Happened to American Individualism, Whatever Happened to American Liberty. And Tocqueville is a man for all seasons. This part of Tocqueville became a very popular subject of discussion back then. I know of no country where there is in general less independence of mind and true freedom of discussion than in America. My sense is that this is no longer the issue. Since the 1960s, we've been in perpetual culture war. And you have a lot of difference of opinion, a lot of shouting, a lot of, engaged discussion. But I'd have you think about the silos that people have now put themselves in. There might be conformity of opinion within each silo, okay? There are certain things that may not be said, certain things that may not be done, whether you're red or blue. Our daughter-in-law, one of our daughters-in-law, is a pastor of a big church outside Milwaukee. When she came in just before COVID happened, we said, yeah, this is a purple church. We have red and blue. She says, what a purple church amounts to is some blue blobs in a red sea. And they had, as a lot of churches did, they had and other organizations too. It's not just a matter of religious observance. They had a lot of people leave during COVID over their policy. And other people would have left if they had taken the other policy. So there's no maybe mass conformity anymore, but I'd have you think about intense conformity and intense pressure to conform within our silos. Maybe last night was one of the few commonly observed holidays in the United States, right? This is our high holy day, yeah. The outcome was good for you, yeah. Yeah, and it used to be that the winner or the most valuable player of the Super Bowl would immediately declare that he was going to America's #1 tourist destination as well, Disney. But now Disney has become an object of division. Disney World used to be the country's #1 honeymoon destination, #1 destination for kids in Make-A-Wish, big spring break thing, big Christmas destination. So there are fewer common objects of objects of common affection, of assumable affection in the United States than there used to be. So we've shattered this cultural conformity, but there might be conformity within silos. What did Tocqueville have envision in the way of solutions here? Well, he's a lawyer, so the first thing he says, lawyers. Lawyers are the great help. Okay, insert your favorite lawyer joke here. It's lawyers that are going to keep these legislatures, these bill mills, keep them honest. They will observe the constitutional principles. And of course, Tocqueville had talked to Judge Joseph Story from the Massachusetts Supreme Court, Chief Justice there, who was kind of the foremost legal authority. And from his high bench, Judge Story thought that the judiciary and the legal profession could order things, settle things down, keep laws from going too far, or the legislators from going astray. A lot of people at the time thought that the solution to the problem was with a strong president, particularly President Trump Jackson. Again, Andrew Jackson was as controversial in his time as Donald Trump is in ours. People either loved him or hated him. These cartoons are images from the Whig Party, the anti-Jackson side of the street. They said for all his invocation of the people, the people's voice, he really was a king. Getting rid of the bank, trampling on the Supreme Court decision in regard to the Trail of Tears, or what became the Trail of Tears. He's quashing the rights of dissent, steamrolling over all precedent. He is a king. So there you see him on the left here as King Andrew Jackson. But then he experiences a mighty fall. And so this is what's going to happen to the old gray head. He's going to be lost. He's going to be dumped in the sea of woe. Interestingly, Tocqueville thought that Jackson's negotiations with South Carolina. Remember that South Carolina was threatening nullification of the tariff. So that's a federal law, fine, but it's not going to be enforced in the sovereign state of South Carolina. And Jackson said, it sure will be, and I'll invade with an army if I have to. So Jackson there anticipates Abraham Lincoln's response to South Carolina in 1861. But Tocqueville was disappointed in how much Jackson gave away in negotiating a non-violent solution to the nullification crisis. He thinks that Jackson had compromised too much. And in fact, he thought this powerful symbol on the throne in the White House really believed in, and this is true of Jackson, in decentralizing power. Hence, he gets rid of the banks, let the state banks do their thing. The states are where the people are more sovereign. or more effectively sovereign. So he represents the people, quote unquote, says Tocqueville, but he advocates a weaker center in the government. Now we're going to later in the session, we're going to talk about Tocqueville's perceived the threat of centralization that he sees, centralization as a real threat. But at this point, he wants to increase the power of the central government. He says in the United States in the early 1830s, the federal government's too weak. The states are too strong. And in fact, he thinks at one point he says, you know, I doubt that the Union was going to survive another 30, 50 years. The states are so strong, the divisions between them, not just over slavery, but over commerce versus agriculture as the heart of the economy. The differences between them are so strong that the bonds holding them together will fray and break, and we'll have several sets of United States, not just one. So he thinks the tyranny of the majority, that's say the overwhelming power of state legislatures, running roughshod over all opposition, might well doom the American Republic. Yeah, again, I didn't have you read anything in here because he goes on for about 50 pages on this. He's just gonna spare you. But any questions about this, the first thread? I'm gonna focus more on the others. Yeah. Oh.
Have you looked at the whole idea of the imperial presidency, particularly back, as I recall, back when Johnson and Nixon, an awful lot of the scholarship then was about the rise of the imperial presidency. I don't know if you have any thoughts or comments on that as it enveloped over the years.
The imperial presidency, that's what the Jackson's Whig proto-republican opponents were accusing him of, right? He's the emperor up there. And he had made his bones by being a great general, right? Defeating the British and defeating the Creek and so forth in the War of 1812. The same charge that was not made until Lincoln, because the presidents between Jackson and Lincoln, except for Polk, were a pretty non-illustrious bunch. But the charge of the imperial presidency was really leveled against Abraham Lincoln by the Confederacy, but also by the Democrats and other dissenters in the North. I mean, he suspended habeas corpus. He creates one of the largest armies in the world. He runs roughshod over precedents and principles. Even the Emancipation Proclamation, he had to work around the Constitution and all the precedents protecting slavery to come up. I mean, the Emancipation Proclamation was a very tough document to get to legally, and he was a lawyer. And then you have the great or the not so great string of presidents in the Gilded Age. Not so much again. In these periods, Jackson to Lincoln, and then Lincoln to Theodore Roosevelt. It's Congress where the power really is. But things really changed with Theodore Roosevelt, and we've been on the imperial presidency ever since. And not accidentally, right in the wake of American empire going from the shores across the seas. And Teddy Roosevelt is a big booster of this. So as the United States becomes a global empire, the imperial presidency ascends with it. So it's much more of a burning question in the 20th century than in the 19th. Okay, this is the one that I think probably grips our attention more today because he sees in these two fairly short chapters written in 1835. I'm sorry, these would be from volume 2, so written in 1840. He anticipates briefly and in pretty brutal prose what is going to be happening in the United States over the course, especially after the Civil War. The threat number 2 to democracy is the prospect of the rise of an industrial aristocracy. And I'm fascinated by how farsighted he is here, because the American Industrial Revolution as a concerted and increasingly dominant force only comes out of this panic of 1837. 1843, 1844, when the economy gets righted, that's when industrialism really takes off. I mean, yes, there are mills in Paterson, New Jersey. There are mills in Lowell, Massachusetts before this, but this is when system-wide industrialization really takes off. 1850s is a great decade of industrialization. That gets overshadowed by the Civil War, but the Civil War is a huge boost to industrialization. It takes a lot of machinery to kill that many people in that short a time, right? And then after that, we have Mark Twain's fabulous, famous, infamous Gilded Age. But leaving the economic process aside for a minute, I think it's interesting how Tocqueville roots this or locates the origins of the spurs to this back in culture and society. So it's something that happens in the economic realm. It has strong political consequences, but it grows out of values and ambitions and hopes that we've looked at before. First of all, remember the broken bonds between among people that the fall of aristocracy brings. Everybody used to be united in that hierarchy, some more happier than others, but everybody knew where they were and everybody had relations to everybody else. But it's not just bonds within society today, but your own personally felt bonds between with your ancestors and your descendants. These bonds are broken too. And that makes everybody in America, he said, very impatient. It has to happen now. What my life comes to is going to end when I die. Great line of his on the volume, published volume, page 644. Life is passing, time is short. What to do? You got to go for the gusto now. You got to do it all now, because we leave nothing to our descendants. We inherit nothing from our forebears. We leave nothing to our descendants. What the value of my life, what the accomplishment of life is, has to happen now. Then, middle class distinctive value. Here we're number 2, the drive for material well-being. He says aristocrats weren't driven by this. They just could assume it. Poor people were not driven by it because they had no hope for it. This is a distinctive middle class ambition, characteristic. And the United States is a middle class country. The drive for material well-being. Hence, we have this restlessness, this urgency and anxiety from having a short life with much to be accomplished. And money, he says in one place, has become the measure of all things. And at this point, he comes up with another really interesting observation that seems to contradict what he said before. Tocqueville, for better or worse, is not a systematic, consistent sociological theorist. He's kind of a sociological observer, just seeing what comes as he goes down the road. But, do I contradict myself? Very well, I contradict myself. I am multitudes, says either Whitman or Emerson. Pardon? Whitman, yeah. Yeah, no, it's I never can. I mean, Emerson could have said it, but do I contradict myself? Very well, I contradict myself. I am multitude. My name is Legion, which is a nice little segue back to one of Jesus' miracles, when Legion was the name of the possessed man out of which Jesus was said to have cast the demons. Oh, yeah, Whitman would be cheeky enough to do that. So at one point, Tocqueville is talking to the ghost of his father. Oh, we have this middle-class competitive society. Social order is just going to go to the dogs. No, says Alexis, because if we're capitalist enterprise requires that you be thrifty, diligent, ordered, and disciplined. Capitalist enterprise does not say that anything goes. It says you got to walk the straight and narrow and really take care of business. But at this point, he says, capitalist enterprise instills a love of gambling, a fascination with chance. Our high holy day was observed in the city built on gambling. Right? That's all Las Vegas was at the start. See Godfather 2 or Godfather 1, I'm not sure. And since the Supreme Court decision, 2019, kind of obviating anti-gambling laws, when I tune in for the national news from about 6:20 to 6:30 at night on local news, you have one gambling ad after another. It's just, and this has become a major source of funding for the school system in the state of Michigan. In Britain, they pour the lottery, it's really cool. They pour the lottery proceeds toward museums, right? So you can go to all these great museums in London for free. It's excellent. So life has become a matter of chance. You have to take risks. You got to go for it. You only live once. You got to grab the main chance. So people indulge in gambling and risk-taking, he says, not out of a rational calculation, but for the thrill of it, which sets up speculative frenzies, he says, and bubbles. He lived, or he saw one of the bubbles, the Panic of 1837, inflated land values in the Mississippi Delta, in extreme indebtedness, speculative indebtedness on the part of state governments. The picture here is of a later bubble. This is Wall Street in 1929. We had our own bubble, real estate bubble, causing the Great Recession in 2008. These bubbles and depressions come regularly in the United States. 1819, 1837, 1857, 1873, 1893, 1906. They're due for another one, but World War I intervened. The big one in 1929. And with no centralized government, no central bank, there's nothing to keep this from happening. The Fed, as it was brought into being, aimed to put an end to this frenzy up and down the roller coaster, the excessive speculation. So the rise of an industrial aristocracy is rooted in core American values. We move from an agricultural economy to an industrial commercial economy because farming takes so long, Whereas if you are in Silicon Valley today, or at least the last decade, if you were a disruptor, you had venture capitalists throwing money at you, even though you're not going to turn a profit for a long time. I think Uber just last year turned a profit for a first time. They've been running in the red all these years. WeWork went to the boards. Crypto is up and down, very very speculative. So this is this risk taking, this drive to make it, the ambition to make a big name for yourself in technological innovation. I think this resembles what Tocqueville saw back in his day. So those are the values in which it's rooted. How it happens is through the economies of scale and the efficiencies of specialization. Henry Ford, call your office. Tocqueville nailed this 60 years before the River Rouge plant. Economic scale, or production scale, and specialization. This remarkable sentence on 649. Nothing in the world of politics ought to concern lawmakers more than these two axioms. That the future is bigness on the part of the enterprise and the scale of the fortunes of those running those enterprises, those few, and the increasing narrowness and the loss of general competency on the part of the workers. As a worker in mass production at that time, you did one thing and you lost the fabled American worker ability in preceding generations to be a generalist, to be able to do anything. Again, I might have said this before. I rode by the house that my grandfather built as a present to his bride around 1910. It's on East 15th Street. My grandpa built a house with everything on his own. Well, he probably called in specialists for plumbing and whatnot. But I can paint. I've proven that I can't hang drywall. Much less electrical, I'm going to kill myself. So who's more advanced? Specialist Jim or generalist Henry? What comes of a society, Tocqueville worries, when everybody's a specialist drone like Jim? And Grandpa Henry's type has gone to the boards. What happens is you create a deep fear in liberal political theory. John Locke said, right, life, liberty, and property, because if you command property, you are not dependent on anyone else, and you are a free and sovereign agent. But what happens when everybody's working for wages? They are dependent. The root of participatory democracy has dried up. It assumes that you are autonomous, that nobody can tell you what to do. But economically, your life depends on drawing wages for just doing one thing. So Tocqueville sees here, it may strike us as odd, because specialization can be very highly productive. But it cuts the root of the warrant or the basis for free participatory elections. Because now, presumably, the boss can tell everybody how to vote because they're dependent on him. Okay. We also have here a very strong anticipation of what Karl Marx says about the alienation of labor. That your life, in his terms, the proletariat's life has become, you become a cog in the machine. Also a very strong anticipation of what Henry David Thoreau had to say about the same phenomenon in the 1840s and 50s. So Tocqueville sees, he notices the upside, the productivity upside of this process, but he's really worried about what the psychological and the political downside. And this is a threat, he says, that will grow. He at the end of those chapters, remember, he says, but it's just in infancy. It's not really that big a deal. Well, it sure will become a big deal. This is again a great cartoon from the Gilded Age. So this is post Civil War, where you have these barons, Jay Gould in the middle, Cornelius Vanderbilt with his good Dutch whiskers on the right with the top hat, and someone named Field. Do you know a billionaire or millionaire named Field from the time? It's I know, yeah. Pardon? He's sitting, yeah, maybe, I don't know. But so you have these fat cats, these robber barons of the Gilded Age. They call themselves captains of industry. And then down below, and we're on the, this is a promontory eroding away. You can see the ocean, the threatening ocean. It's hard to tell, hard to read maybe. It says hard times. So hard times are washing away this promontory. Well, the bosses are fine, but down below you see the huddled masses, right? The Marxist proletariat being crushed. They're holding these fat cats up. One of my favorites. This is the United States Senate, right? You have the steel trust, the copper trust, the sugar trust, the iron trust, et cetera, et cetera. And all these senators are looking around, tell me how to vote. Well, the fat cats aren't in the Senate gallery anymore. They're behind the scenes making campaign contributions, right? Yeah, and in the lobby. I mean, this system has not changed. Money talks, it now talks more behind closed doors than it did at that time. I mean, at one point in the US Senate, I think in the 1870s, bribes in cash were literally being paid on the floor of the Senate. The senator would vote a certain way, and the lobbyist would come around with a packet of money. Again, it's far more discreet now. And here's our day. These are the 5 richest people in the United States as of 5 years ago. Can you name them, boys and girls? Upper left, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Mark Zuckerberg. Lower left, and I just looked him up this morning, the founder of Oracle. Yeah, thank you, Larry Ellison. Yeah. Their wealth in 2019 was equivalent to 2% of the country's GDP. Interesting, none of these guys are industrialists. They're all in finance and technology, okay? So the commanding heights of the economy have changed from raw industry, maybe to electronics, now to IT and finance. But the chairs have new occupants, but there's still chairs on top of the hierarchy, yeah? Little bit of some statistics here. Here's a pie chart. The blue is the top 1/10 of 1%, controlling 1/8, 12.6% of American wealth. This is fourth quarter 2022. The rest of the top 1% is the black arc, controlling 18.5%. So the top 1% control 31% of American wealth. 1% of the people controlling 1/3 of the wealth. Then the gray, the largest segment here, is the next 9%. So the rest of the 10%, top 10%. Statistically, I gotta say that's where Tina and I land. We're way over toward the red though, which is the next segment from the median wealth in the United States to the 90% level. That's 29%. The bottom half of the United States population, people below median wealth holding, 50% of the people with 3% of the wealth. So you didn't have that. Another one here. Oh yeah, here. You couldn't really have that in an agricultural economy. So the United States, this is the top 1% share of income, not wealth, over the last 270 years. So in the United States, just before independence, 13 American colonies, very largely an agrarian economy. You had the top 1% drew only about 7 or 8% of national income. And even that was much higher than it had been 50 years before. You have the Holland or the Netherlands, the gray dots, and then the light gray thing that spikes. You see it emerging just above around 1900. England, Wales, and then the UK, the top dotted line relatively high income inequality. The red line is the United States, was one of the most equal in income as late as the Civil War, but then it rises to meet the decelerating or the decreasing or the increasing equality in the UK. Japan comes into the scene, and then World War II is the great equalizer. Higher taxes create more economic equality. And then you can see the United States spiking up, particularly since 1980, to lead the world, the developed world, if you will, in income inequality.
What causes that big spike for the Netherlands about 1920? What brought that so suddenly high?
Yeah, I don't know. That's that's when a lot of our forebears here in the room came over. I think it might have been well, the Netherlands remained neutral during World War I. They were not invaded, but they were strategically exporting things to Germany. A lot of Dutch people made a lot of money on the black market in World War I. And everybody else was, I mean, the UK wealth was, the top 10% really got hammered in World War I. Well, they also lost a lot of their sons, the officers. But anyway, so the more industrial becomes, your economy becomes, without anything else slowing it down, the more unequal your wealth and income distribution is going to be. That's one thing the governments in these industrialized countries try to do. They try to capture some of that wealth via tax, right? Because that's where the revenue possibilities are. So U.S. income distribution at the time of independence, compared to time of the Civil War and very recently, you see the top 10% gaining more and more percentage of the income over time. And let me see where I was here. Again, income inequality or equality, the lower the bar here, the more equal you are. The 13 colonies were more equal than their chief competitors, if you will, England, Wales, and then the Netherlands. Okay, so the threat of rise of an industrial aristocracy. I find him to be very farsighted here, except that he thought it wasn't really that bad of a problem because it was only a small sector, but it really took off after this book came out. And I really appreciate how he roots this, not just as Marx would do in the next 20 years or so, in raw economic forces, but in the values of the population. People pursue industrial occupations, he says, because they have limited time on earth. They want, if you're going to make it, you got to make it in your own time. And commercial and industrial enterprise is much more likely a field for that than slogging it out on the farm. The key to making money on the farm, agriculturally, we've known this time out of mind. The key to making money in agricultural pursuits is get somebody else to do the heavy lifting. You own the land, you have to have very often a bonded labor force. Enslaved people in the Western Hemisphere, serfs in Russia, peasants in China, people who couldn't move, people who had to work for you, and whom you could pay the minimum possible to keep alive. So that's the way to make big money in agriculture historically. So it was, yeah, it's rational. If you have to make big money fast, it's rational to do something else. Yeah.
Yolanda, let me give you the mic.
Hello.
Yeah.
Oh, there we are. Okay. Were they using slaves? I'm thinking in the example that Tocqueville gives, it's people going to the southern states
Mhm.
in order to pick out where cotton and sugarcane are grown and get your slaves together. That's what he means without saying it.
Mhm.
And grow a crop for a couple of years, and then you can sell it for a big bundle and get rid of the slaves and sell the slaves with it or something. But that's what he's referring to. Our middle class version of that in our family was taking a homestead in South Dakota.
Uh-huh.
But it's you that did the work with a
Yeah.
couple of cousins or brothers or something, or a few hired people. You did the work, and you were still expecting maybe to sell it to make your money to come back to
Yeah.
South Holland and have some better land in South Holland and something like that.
Yeah.
So there were many, many little Dutch collections in South Dakota that took homesteads for the reason that Tocqueville is talking about. But is he making a sliding reference to slavery here without saying it?
I think he's noticing where the real astronomical rise in agricultural returns are going to happen. That's in the Mississippi Delta,
Yeah.
which is just coming into under cultivation now.
Yeah.
And the Black Belt, if you will, in Alabama. And yeah, he catches something that we often forget. Northern complicity in the expansion of the system.
Yeah.
It wasn't just that Boston and New York banks were financing these land purchases and the purchase of the enslaved labor and the purchase of the supplies to get going. It was young northern men who saw this not as the gold rush, but as the black rush.
Yeah.
Black soil and black labor, I can make a ton of money. Yeah.
The other question I had was about gambling. Not only was the Super Bowl full of gambling ads, but when you saw the first 10 analysts sitting at their panel, every single one of them told who by how much they were betting on.
Yeah.
They were referring to their bets. It was so saturated with gambling. It was sickening. So I'm thinking in the 19th century, along with the temperance movement, which you mentioned was so successful
Mhm.
in cutting drinking by 80%, you said.
Yeah.
Was the church's idea that gambling is wrong and you should not be gambling successful also in holding back the tendency he sees in Americans to go put your money on the table and see if you can win something?
Mostly no. It was not
Okay.
successful.
Well, in case your trivia for today is that Geronimo was once a member of the Reformed Church
Yeah.
in America, but he could not give up his gambling habit. He was too culturally tied to his people.
Yeah.
And so he was excommunicated for gambling.
Yeah. Well, there were some churches that put a ban on gambling, but again, in the later the 19th century, more men belonged to lodges in the big cities than they belonged to churches.
And were the lodges heavily involved in gambling?
I think they wanted to. Well, I don't know. I'm Christian Reformed, so I never set foot in one.
Oh,
My sense is that the Masons, anyway, really were trying to have male mentors for young up and coming business people. And I think they would try to teach them sobriety, regularity, without being absolutist about it. So I think it was more of a upper class and working class thing, this mania for betting.
I believe it's more connected with people who have, the less money people have, the less knowledge they have of the sort of right ways to invest their money. And they're thinking that it's the same as that any investment is gambling. And so you might as well play a
Right.
game.
Right. And the prospects of me making it in American society by conventional ways are slim and none.
Yeah.
So
That's what they think.
yeah, we'll hit the lottery. Yeah.
Yep.
And you know, the house always wins, but I'm smarter than the house, or I'm the child of fortune and I'll make out better than the house. Yeah, it's interesting how the NFL, National Football League, has changed their policy on this.
Yeah.
They used to be absolute death on gambling. they were really worried it was going to corrupt the integrity of the game. And so they forbade it. And then a few years ago, they said there's just too much money there to be made. And now they publish, they publish the odds. I mean, when I look up during the regular season, what are the experts predicting who's going to win this game or that game? You can't get a straight prediction on that. The prediction is, are they going to beat the odds? Are they, so it's, it's become, I think it's always been there, but it has now become much more acceptable and polite. I know of a big Christian Reformed wheeler dealer out in California who was, anathema on abortion, anathema on same-sex relationships, and very conventionally goes to Las Vegas and gambles. I mean, I don't know about the RCA, but the CRC I grew up in, gambling was verboten. And that has apparently has radically eroded. Yeah. In general, I think in mainline Protestantism, the larger denominations, there was sort of a negative attitude toward it, but they didn't go after it the way they did against drinking. Good friend of mine grew up a nice Baptist girl in Akron, Ohio, she said. And I accepted Jesus in my heart, and the only rule I had to obey, we didn't have to memorize or profess a creed or anything, but we just had to pledge not to drink. So that was the criterion of orthodoxy in her Northern Baptist church. But I don't think that extended to gambling. I think it would just be sort of frowned upon. But
Once you get beyond the breakup of the big pyramid of the stratification of the social universe that you talked about back home, and everybody's independent, really isn't everything they do a gamble to some extent.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be putting $1 in a machine or in front of somebody and saying, here's the parameters of this bet. But really everybody's taking their chance of doing something different with the, with the specter of loss on the other side of things.
Yeah. Hey, I have an opportunity for you. Right?
You're right, exactly.
Trust me.
Yeah. Or if I do this in a certain way, I would feel much more secure that it's going to play well for me.
Yeah.
That's still a gamble.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing interesting about the Gilded Age, I just showed you these those cartoons of those robber barons. One thing they were trying to do was calm the American economy down and remove risk. So John D. Rockefeller was driving all these small enterprises, oil enterprises, out of business because they made the marketplace chaotic and undependable. What you want is predictability. Capitalists love predictability. Yes, there's risk, but you want to reduce risk, right? That's big business. Those are the titans of industry, but there are all these little scramblers coming up underneath. And that's been going on in Silicon Valley for the fullest part of this century, right? All these startups. And one of our sons was a graduate student at Berkeley during some of this. And I mean, he's in Chinese studies, but it washed over there too. What students were talking about in bars after seminar was, venture capital, startup, and the latest scheme to make it big, because they don't want to be a schmo like that. So, it'll be interesting to watch as we continue to grow older. May it will be for a long time. How Silicon Valley, how the big tech sort of sorts itself out and stabilizes and regularizes, because there's you got to take risk. What you want to do for the long term is to minimize risk.
So you want to stabilize Silicon Valley. when what we really have coming is the IT change, which is going to change industry. It'll change law, it'll change healthcare, it'll change medicine, manufacturing.
Mhm.
It's going to change everything. It's
mean
not
AI?
little tiny changes. These are great big changes
Yeah.
that we are going to see.
Yeah.
And it's not necessary. It will be, Silicon Valley is just part of it.
Yeah, yeah,
AI is going to change all of the stuff
Yeah.
we now know
yeah.
in the next few years.
Um,
I'm sorry, that's
No, it's
I'm a
true.
risk taker, so I
Yeah,
see.
It's
this
true. It's,
stuff that scares me.
so there's so many possibilities there. And it invites risk taking. And some people are going to make it big and some people aren't. And I think it's interesting to what happened with Sam blanking, the guy who got booted and then came back in. Yeah, yeah, yeah. His board was trying to restrain him to make possible social consequences of these changes, bring those into the picture and try to adjudicate those. He said, no, you got to go for the money. The rest of the stuff will sort itself out. Yeah, and but yeah, the disruption in social relations, the fake Biden voice in the New Hampshire primary, and on it goes. I really anticipate even more corrosion of trust, because how do you know this is really a picture of the person, and how do you know it's not some coming out of some workshop. Yeah, so yeah, Jim the pessimist is looking on the downside. Yeah, well, it's one thing that's going to be. That's not where the action's going to be, but I think it's an inescapable consequence. Oh. Okay, threat number 3, democratic despotism. And you kind of wonder, what's that about? He's really talking about the threat of centralized control. And he has here, Tocqueville, a very accurate analysis of the limits of power on these old regimes. So we think back to the Middle Ages and the early modern period with these absolute monarchs, Louis XIV, he can control everything. And they can, what they say goes. But there's an old saying out of China, the sky is high and the emperor is far away. Okay. And Tina and I found that in 1 year of living in China, that it's a local government. It's the regional prefect. It's the mayor of the city who, in fact, has more power than President Xi or whomever in Beijing, because you just have limits on the effective reach of your grasp. You have limits on that by way of technology, communication, and transportation. So Louis XIV can say this, but is it going to be obeyed in the village on the Belgian border that takes 5 days to get to on a stagecoach? So the old regime's effective power, not their authority, but their effective power is limited by the relatively primitive transportation and communication technology of their day, and by a dispersion of power among many levels and localities. You have all these competing systems of law and responsibility before Napoleon, yeah? And so big families like the Tocquevilles could rule this part of Normandy, but they couldn't rule anywhere else. But the king couldn't reach into what they were doing, so forth and so on. These limits, Tocqueville says, are now gone. We now have the possibility of direct control from the center to the periphery, from the top to the bottom, just by way of transportation and communication development. So here's a map of Principal roads and waterways on the left-hand side, that's in 1840. The right-hand side is 1850. You can see how the canal system and the road system has been expanded. National Road from it's essentially I-70, you know. The Wilderness Road from Washington down to the Piedmont and across to Nashville. If you've never done it, by the way, I would highly recommend the old Natchez Trail, Natchez Trace. It's a wonderful little road to take from Nashville to, if you want to go all the way to Natchez. You can only drive 35 miles an hour, but it's a great way to take in the countryside. And you're following the route that Andrew Jackson took with his troops to the Battle of New Orleans, at least until you're in the middle of Mississippi. Yeah, it's interesting how some of the modern interstate system follows the same route. You see Interstate 95 there, essentially along the East Coast, Interstate 70. You see kind of I-94 from Detroit to Chicago, and so forth and so on. Anyway, so the transportation system is beginning to fill out. Railroads built in the United States by 1870, top map, then below 1890. Talk about a speculative frenzy on a technology that was going to change the world. Railroads was where it's at in the Gilded Age. Every officer, every member of the officer corps of the Union Army went into a railroad executive after the war, because that's where the big new possibilities were, and that's where the money was. That top map, by the way, you can see why, one big reason why the United States won the Civil War over the Confederacy. Much better transportation system. One thing that this transportation grid allows is much quicker communication and much quicker enforcement of decisions in the public sector, but also in the private sector. It allows the creation of nation-spanning, national-spanning corporations. It's not Bethlehem Steel or Lehigh Steel anymore. It's U.S. Steel, right? The big one formed in 1901 in Gary, Indiana. A banking web, limited by state law sometimes, but you have a much more integrated economy under the command of fewer and fewer people. Here's the U.S. interstate system, road transportation today. Notice some of the same original routes here, but now spanning the United States. Again, integrating the economy. And here's just Delta's map. You see the three hubs of Twin Cities, Salt Lake City, Atlanta, and a little bit Detroit. Distance is no object to control with these technologies. Right after Tocqueville publishes the second volume, in 1843, we have the invention of the telegraph, which makes it 1844, which makes it easy to communicate between Massachusetts and Texas. And someone marveled that in front of Henry David Thoreau, and Thoreau replied, "What would a person in Massachusetts have to say to anyone in Texas? And why would they heed anyone from Texas that had anything to say?" Okay. Well, because this is now much easier, much more integrated and command-centered economy. But it's not just the technology, again, that Tocqueville sees at work. Again, we go back to cultural and social values. He talks about, this is on the book page 790, the lonely individual lost in the crowd. You know, we've broken these bonds. We're all on our own. We're free and independent. But geez, where am I? Who am I? What do I amount to? I don't know my place anymore, and my expectations of me, my role as in the old system. Where do I turn? How do I get oriented? You look to the crowd. of free and equal people. The lonely individual comes to see only, great phrase out of Tocqueville, the vast and magnificent image of the people itself. And once this people has acted by democratic election to create a government, they grant it social power without limits. So here we're back to the possibility of the tyranny of the majority, but Tocqueville's now knocking on the next door, the power to command from the top or the center without limits. And then this harrowing rhetoric out of the kind of chapter 6, the kind of despotism to fear. When I think of the petty passions of people today, of the softness of their mores, the extent of their enlightenment, the purity of their religion, the mildness of their morality, their orderly and laborious habits, and the restraint that nearly all of them maintain in vice as well as in virtue, what I fear is not that they will find tyrants among their leaders, but rather they will find protectors. So we have a new kind of oppression possible, threatening, he says today. I see an innumerable host of men, all alike and equal, endlessly hastening after petty and vulgar pleasures with which they fill their souls. Each of them, here echoing what he says earlier, withdrawn into himself is virtually a stranger to the fate of all others. For him, his children and personal friends comprise the entire human race. He remains alongside the rest of his citizens, but does not see them. He touches them, but does not feel them. He exists only in himself and for himself. If he still has a family, he no longer has a country. Over against these men stands an immense tutelary, educational tutoring power, which assumes sole responsibility for securing their pleasure and watching over their fate. It is absolute, meticulous, regular, provident, in mild. It seeks only to keep them in childhood irrevocably. It works willingly for their happiness, but wants to be the sole agent and only arbiter of that happiness. Why not relieve them entirely of the trouble of thinking and of the difficulty of living? So this is the new Leviathan out of Thomas Hobbes' philosophy, rising up, only not oppressive and bashing heads, but seducing hearts, softening character. People grow soft and dependent. They fear not tyrants, but yearn for protectors. Where is this vast power? Thereby hangs a big dispute between the right and left in the United States over the past, since the rise of the New Deal. Where is this centralized, overbearing power that wants to keep us in permanent childhood? People on the right wing will typically be answered in big government with its consummate bureaucracy. Some of you, like me, may be withdrawing from Social Security. That's the big government, okay? Pentagon remaining today as since its foundation on 9/11/1941. The biggest office building in the world. That's big government. You walk through DC, all these marble pillars of bureaucracy. That's big government. On the other hand, people on the left say that this social power that wants to keep us in perpetual childhood, that dominates our visions, our yearnings, and keeps us happy, is a mass consumer society. So is it the Pentagon or Amazon? To me, you know where I land on the spectrum. By the way, I realized as soon as I submitted the thing, I should have these images reversed, left and right. Sorry about that. It was too late to change. I had to drive here. I don't know. I get a sense in the United States that a lot of people chafe at the government, especially as April 15 draws in, right? Public polling shows this year after year after year. Most people in America really want to cut government programs, bring it down to size, stop waste and taxation, except for the program they really benefit from. Cut everybody else's program, but not mine. But the point here is that there's this kind of edginess, there's this sort of negativity, underlying feeling of or sentiment of suspicion or negativity about the government. The particular kind of government chafed at depends whether you're red or blue or in between. But you know, on my neighborhood Facebook profile, you know, what's the helicopter at night? What's the police helicopters up there? You know, looking for a runaway car. What's the helicopter doing up there? Oh, Grand Rapids trying to get it right. You know, there's just you know, that my garbage wasn't picked up. Moan, moan, moan. And I don't see nearly as much of that as on the other side, on the Amazon side. Amazon is so cool. You push a button, it's there tomorrow, and you get it at a lower price. So is the worry here is the thing to be worried about big government or the blandishments of a mass society? I read these pages here, I'm thinking that Tocqueville is an anticipator, early sociologist, anticipating what European and American sociologists will come to big time in the 20th century, the benefits and the perils, but the operations of a mass society. He's anticipating the emergence of a mass society, and he gets a lot of things right. Ultimately, is this power on this side or that side? The answer is yes, because Amazon needs the transportation system. In the United States, the government needs the taxes. In order to keep a system like this going, you need coordination and control. That happens on the corporate level, it also happens on the government level. And these two often seem to be opponents, but it's the collaboration between them, willing or otherwise, that I think make our nation go. So yeah, this is, I think once Tocqueville got acquainted with Amazon, he would say, yeah, there's social power is in both of these places. One may be more in politics, the other in the culture, but he closes off this book in a very poignant way. So on page 832, we're on page 15 in the handout. If I search these various traits, so he's looking back over the whole book, for one that seems to me most general, most striking, I find that what is happening to fortunes is also reproducing itself in 1,000 other forms. Nearly all extremes are being softened and blunted. Almost everything that stands out is being wiped out and replaced by something average. Neither is high nor is low, neither is brilliant nor is obscure as what the world once knew. I cast my eyes upon America, this innumerable host of similar beings among whom no one stands out or stoops down. The sight of such universal uniformity saddens and chills me. And I am tempted to join Papa in mourning for the aristocratic society that is no more. But on the other hand, top of 833, bottom of page 15 in the handout, it is natural to believe that is what is most satisfying to the eyes of man's creator and keeper, that is, say, to God or history, is not the singular prosperity of a few, like the Tocqueville family, but the greater well-being of all these white Americans. What seems decadence to me is therefore progress in his eyes. What pains me pleases him. Equality is less lofty, perhaps, but more just, and its justice is the source of its grandeur and beauty. So Here from an earthly point of view, he has his eye on what has been lost. And the pressure, particularly here, of conformity and bland happiness. The summit of American cuisine being a Big Mac. Really? This is what you got. Well, we've sold 50 billion. What could be wrong? The majority speaks. This drives me crazy, says Tocqueville. But then I try to take God's point of view. Not just ministers can do that, huh? I try to take it from a more neutral or a more transcendent point of view, and I see millions of people who used to be downtrodden and kept in place now seeing opportunity and reaching for simple pleasures and having ability to do that. If they choose a Big Mac rather than a filet mignon, who am I to, you know, God says it's okay. So he has this, he's trying to balance the scale between what has been lost and what is gained. So he's the final injunction is to his intellectual class and his fellow heirs of aristocracy. The task, and I think this is for us too. We've inherited this system with a lot of changes, but I hope you've seen some of the things that still hold true out of his analysis. The task is no longer to hold on to the particular advantages that inequality procured for humankind, but to secure the new goods that equality can provide. We must not try to make ourselves like our ancestors, but do our best to achieve the kind of grandeur and happiness that is appropriate to us. And so now, having reached the end of my journey, I can see all at once, but from afar, the various objects that I contemplated separately along the way, and I am full of fears and hopes. I see great dangers that can be warded off and great evils that can be avoided or held in check. And he's saying essentially, to my fellow intellectuals, this is our job, to try to help the lawmakers see how to avoid the worst and how to make the best out of what can be a mediocre situation. Some people have given up and say that you can't do anything about it. These are false and cowardly doctrines, which can only produce weak people and pusillanimous, kind of like hybrid modality, kind of cowardly nations. Providence did not create mankind entirely independent or altogether enslaved. We're not entirely free and we're not entirely fated. Around each person it traced, to be sure, a fatal circle beyond which he or she may not venture, but within the ample limits thus defined, we are free and powerful, and so are peoples. It is beyond the ability of nations today to prevent conditions within them from becoming equal, but it is within their power to decide whether equality will lead them into servitude or liberty, enlightenment or barbarism, prosperity or misery. So we can't do everything, but there's something to do. This is his moderate point of view. He's moderate all his life. When he's in the Chamber of Deputies and he's in the new parliament after the revolutions of 1848, he's trying to get the extremes on the right and the left to either go away or try to come to the table and find some sort of middle ground. When that experiment ends in another military coup by Napoleon Bonaparte's nephew, Napoleon III, he retires to his writing career and writes his next great book on the old regime and the French Revolution, trying to figure out once more what went wrong and what might be able to be put right. So, yeah. Anything on Tocqueville in general or this third? I encourage you to reread those pages with Amazon or mass consumerism in mind as the power that drives us, as well as the more usual culprit being identified, which is bureaucratic government.
I see polarities now between democracy versus despotism. And I don't see that the kind of polarity between left and right that you saw. And maybe I've come from a strange perspective, but maybe mine are more allied to our current political parties. He doesn't say much about political parties and their influence. And is that something that he slept through or something, or
political
what?
parties were really not organized into a two-party system until 1838. So you have the followers of Jackson and of Jefferson before him, who are sort of the Democratic Party, also known as the Republican Democratic Party, just to confuse us all. But the Whig Party, which is the prototype or the forerunner of the Republican Party, is not really competitive nationally until 1838. And that's why that election in 1840 had such a huge turnout, because the parties were going out and mobilizing people then. Yeah, I think, yeah, I share the same outlook that there are authoritarian governments on the rise, Russia, India, Hungary, maybe Israel, around the world. The United States has been a beacon of democracy. My friends in the Netherlands just shuddered in horror when they saw, well, in unbelief when they saw Trump elected the first time, and shuddered in horror at January 6th, 2021. They couldn't believe this happened in the beacon of democracy. Tocqueville would ask us to pull back from that and also see the despotism possible in our own country, where we conform, what we should be questioning. Where's the possibility of dissenting opinion? So he would ask us to not just point to the problem out there, but in here. Yeah.
You may have said this, and I may have missed it, but so he distills all this with, and then in the end he says, well, the old system of the stratification has its benefits for everybody, but oh my goodness, this independence of people, it's a successful, unique thing, which we all enjoy. But he goes back to say, but some kind of blend of these is really the best of all worlds. In his time, how did he imagine is the process by which you blend those together?
Yeah. Well, James Madison had his own idea at the time of the writing the Constitution that, yeah, the people will vote, but they'll vote for only one thing, the House of Representatives. More often than not, he thought the president would be elected out of the House because you'd have so many candidates, no political parties controlling candidates, that there would be no majority. The House would do that. State legislatures elect senators. The Electoral College blunts direct democracy as well. So, and the people rising to the top here would be the better educated, the broader minded, the better informed, and they will have risen above the pell-mell competition of everyday life to take a broad view of things, right? For Thomas Jefferson, you have 250 people out in the fields doing the work. He can build the core collection of the Library of Congress, okay? So that was his thing. And I think Tocqueville had something like that, we former aristocrats, we well-educated people, we alumni of the Sorbonne can advise the people in Parliament who have gotten there with some advantages as well. And that'll be the blend. But I think he's relying on the traditions of education and public responsibility. And he's looking around America and say, how well are those grounded and upheld? He's a little worried, but that would be his hope.
Thank you.
Thank you for that last excellent question. It's 2:30 and I'm not gonna make you stay longer. feel free to stay and talk to Jim
Yeah.
or talk to one another. Thank you all again for coming. 4 sessions. We appreciate it.